So we want to welcome everyone. One of the things that we really feel like is really essential for migrant ed programs is that we're looking for partnerships with agencies that are working with the same population we are. And we are really blessed to have the opportunity to have the National Monitor Advocate with us today, Laura's going to be explaining what they do. And I feel like I'm going to learn alongside of you, because this was a program that I didn't work with as well as I think I should have in the state of Tennessee when I was there. And in our role with IDRC, we see the need to see if we can establish kind of national partnerships. And I was able to talk with their advocates, what was it, last week? Yeah. And some of them were able to say, yeah, we work with migrant ed. And so this is just a partnership that is waiting for us on both sides to do things. And so I want to turn the time over to Laura. And as you have questions, Laura, do you want me to tell you as they come in, or do you want to?
Yep, I'm happy to stop as they come up, is fine.
Okay, so welcome everyone. We appreciate you guys joining us. And so I'm going to turn the time over to Laura. And again, thank you for your, for coming in and talking with us today.
Absolutely. And thank you, Jessica, as well for suggesting that we do this. You guys should all be able to see my screen, hopefully, unless I mess something up at the get-go. But I'm Laura Tramontana, the National Monitor Advocate from the United States Department of Labor within the Employment and Training Administration, or ETA. So I'm going to talk through the work that we do, some ways that we've seen people collaborate in the past with migrant education programs, and also super interested in your feedback. If you have ways that you'd like to connect with us, or things that, examples of things that do work well and whatnot. I think there might be a couple of people I saw in the chat that are actually from state workforce agencies. So I'd be interested to see if they have any examples as well. So this is my mug. I already introduced who I am, but the benefit of this slide is that afterwards, you'll have some contact information from me. We have kind of like a general National Monitor Advocate mailbox that's nma@dol.gov, that if you have any problems connecting when you're trying to make some relationships with states and at the local levels, you can always reach out to us and say, hey, I'm trying to make this connection, but I'm not sure, I'm not really getting through, or something like that. Can you help us? We're there to be a liaison for you as well. So you can definitely use that email if you are interested in having any support from our office. I'm going to start from the perspective of explaining what we do in general, basically at the Employment and Training Administration, and how we fund grant programs, specifically for employment and training. So basically, the ETA provides many different grants, some that we call formula funding, which basically are based on a formula that go to state workforce agencies. So your Department of Labor's, your economic commissions, whatever it's called in your state, they go by different names. But basically we fund grants that'll go by formula to the different states that they're going to get to fund employment training programs, unemployment insurance related grants, and things like that. Additionally, we fund some discretionary grants, which are basically grants that organizations have to apply for and compete for. And in those cases, they're applying and saying, we would use the funds this way, and we do fund some grants that are related to farm workers in the discretionary world as well. That's particularly, we talk about the National Farmworker Jobs Program is a discretionary grant that we fund and people apply for, organizations apply for. But additionally, we give that money to the state workforce agencies, and all of these different grants that we fund come together under one roof, essentially, right? And we call that at the American Jobs Center. Sometimes they're called one-stops. Some states have other creative names. I've certain things like Career Center, Workforce Center, all of those things. They should have some kind of common branding, which is on this slide for American Jobs Center, to indicate that they are funded through the USDOL ETA specifically. But basically it's designed to be a one-stop shop where you can walk in as a person who needs employment and training, and they can walk into that office and say, hey, I need, X help, and someone will help you and get you to where you need to be, or help you directly. So it's a really great resource. There's a link on this page right here that has where you could find your local American Job Centers. I think Jessica just put it in the chat too. So if you're looking to make a connection at the local level, that would be a great place to start as well. So within the American Job Centers, one of the required partner programs is what we call our Wagner-Pizer grant. And the Wagner-Pizer grant is basically a really basic level of saying, I have people who need work and I have employers who need workers. Let's bring them together. Another name that it goes by oftentimes is called labor exchange or just employment services. And it's that really basic function. And so through Wagner-Pizer, we have to serve farm workers equally and equitably. And so that's where I get involved, because my role as a national monitor advocate, in your state monitor advocates, and we have regional monitor advocates as well, who are involved in monitoring and providing support to the Wagner-Pizer folks, again, who are just trying to make connections for I need work, I need workers, bring them together to make sure that migrant seasonal farm workers are served equally, have access to all of those services as well. And so they're all housed and operate through American Job Centers in addition to all of the other programs. So it really is thinking about it like a building that's a one-stop shop. You walk in, you can get an array of services there. Some of those services include things like labor market information. As an employer or as somebody looking for work, you can say, you know, what are the needed jobs, what's in demand in the area right now or in the industries that I'm looking at. That labor market information funding has funds to support the state workforce agency, basically pooling that information together and providing it out. Employment services, like I said, that's our Wagner-Pizer folks that the monitor advocate system falls within, which includes job search assistance. There's human resource consultation services that fall under our services that is offered to businesses as well. Also training for new skills and new credentials. A lot of times that's offered through other programs that are funded through what we call the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, or WIOA, W-I-O-A. And there's several different grants that fall under that funding. So for example, back into the farm worker world, the National Farm Worker Jobs Program, or NFJP, is a training program that can assist in those ways too. They provide supportive services to farm workers. They also provide access to and facilitation for training. Additionally, at the American Job Centers, and later on I'll talk more about this too through our monitor advocate system, we have what we call the Employment Service and Employment Related Law Complaint System, which is a great resource for farm workers and non-farm workers as well, to be able to make complaints about things that are related to employment services, so the services that we offer, but also just about employers, right? So it might have nothing to do with the services that we provide, but it's about an employer, and we'll get involved to, in some cases, try to resolve, and in other cases, refer out to enforcement agencies. There's other services available and information available, including things like tax credits. We have a work opportunity tax credit for hiring people of certain backgrounds. And then also referrals to supportive services is a big service that's provided at these AJCs. Another thing that you have access to through the American Job Center and through specifically the Wagner-Pizer Employment Service Grant is what we call our agricultural recruitment system. And this is basically, like I said, the basic function of the Wagner-Pizer grant is to bring people who are looking for jobs together with employers who are looking for workers. What the agricultural recruitment system, or ARS, does is it says specifically for farm work jobs that are temporary or seasonal, there's some special rules that go along with them, right? Because we know that workers who move from one place to another are migrant potentially, and have, you know, temporary attachments to areas and whatnot, are sometimes at higher risk for abuses. So the ARS system has a lot of safeguards that are built into it. And it includes things like, you know, if the employer is going to file a temporary job order, a request for workers, then they have to meet certain requirements in what they include in that job order, in that posting, if they're going to use the Wagner-Pizer services specifically. And so we also have the opportunity through the ARS system to clear job orders to different levels. So traditionally, when you go into an American Job Center as an employer in a different industry, non-agricultural, what you do is you say, I need this many workers, and the American Job Center will place a job order in that local area, right? And that's great. But like I said, for farm work, we know people tend to migrate. And I know you guys know that very well and familiar with those patterns. So for agriculture, we have the opportunity to start at the local level. But if you can't find enough workers within the local commuting distance, within that one American Job Center's service area, then the employer can say, I am interested in recruiting in other areas of the state as well. And we can clear that order to be recruited on a wider basis. And we have, again, special safeguards and rules that kick in at that level that say, you've got to now, make sure that you're complying with different laws. You might have to provide housing if that's applicable. We're going to check some other wage requirements potentially and things like that. And that's all for worker protection. And so that's a great facet there, but then it goes steps further than that too, in which the employer can then recruit at the, throughout the whole state level. And if they're still not successful in finding workers, they can, with the coordination of the state workforce agency, say, okay, I'm interested in clearing this order for recruitment in other states, right? And again, there's some special safeguards and requirements and make sure we're complying with different laws at that point too. And the employer, education of the employer, make sure that they know about all of this stuff, right? And then they, with approval, they would go through the ETA regional office at that point, if they're just trying to find US workers, and they'd be able to recruit in other states. So that's a really great tool, again, because there's so much worker protection that's built into the regulations about it. And a lot of the work that I do, a lot of the work that your state monitor advocates do, and the regional monitor advocates do, is monitoring those orders to make sure that we are complying with all of those rules and regulations, so that, again, workers know what they're signing up for, that they get certain notices, that employers sign assurances and things like that. Additionally, on this slide, you'll see in the box, there's some information on what we call field checks. So if we've placed a worker through the ARS system, and it's related to, so if it's an ARS order and we've placed somebody on that order domestically, then we can actually just show up unannounced at that job site and say, we're going to check that everything that you said that was going to be offered to these employees is actually happening, right? So we're going to check wages. We're going to check that the housing provided is up to snub and compliant. We're going to check that the workers are actually working where they're supposed to be working, that they're not doing other unapproved, work, that transportation, potentially is safe and all of that stuff. So we have a lot of compliance assistance roles, in addition to, again, that basic function of just putting workers together with employers when we're specifically talking about agriculture. Additionally, there's a note on this slide that talks about connection to the H-2A process. So I know a lot of you are probably familiar with this H-2A program. And up until now, I've been talking all about domestic functions. We've been talking about US-based workers who are looking for employment, connecting them to jobs, making sure that they're safe and everything's compliant. Now, an employer can also request to bring in foreign workers from other countries through the H-2A visa program. And whenever they do that, they also have to use our ARS system to try to find US workers. So there's some additional safeguards and assurances built into this process to make sure that when they're bringing in foreign-based workers, they're not disadvantaging US workers. So part of what we do in field checks, again, is saying, like, have you recruited for US workers? Are you paying people who are based in the US the same as you're paying the H-2A visa holders and things like that? But when we do field checks, and as I mentioned, we have that complaint system, we are interested in protection for both H-2A visa holders and US-based workers. In the eyes of ETA, when we do our compliance assistance, And checks, we're looking to see if you're working, that you're getting what you're entitled to, right? And additionally, that goes for individuals who might be undocumented. We don't ask those questions when we go out specifically to do outreach, specifically to do field checks and things like that. It's not relevant to the work that we do. It's more important that people are protected and safe and getting what they signed up for. So that's an important thing, I think, for partners to know about the work that we do. Back to our basic access and services at the American Job Center, especially in the wake of the pandemic in the last 2 years now, our American Job Centers have been going through some adjustments in making services accessible to people remotely and virtually. So they, already had these services set up in a lot of ways, but there's been some expansion, I'll say, for sure. So there is access to these services through phone, email, and website. And additionally, going into the actual monitor advocate system that I'm a part of, that is basically another way that we make services available to migrant seasonal farm workers specifically remotely, right? So what the monitor advocate system does is it's responsible to make sure that the services that I've been talking about are equitable and provided to farm workers. We have the complaint system. The monitor advocate system is involved in monitoring that complaint system, following up on complaints, making sure things are resolved and processed properly as well. We implement and sustain an outreach program, which I'll explain more in a minute. We also provide farm workers notification of available employment services and worker rights, facilitate the ARS system that I just explained, and monitoring how we provide services through the employment service offices, which are located within the American Job Center. And then also making sure that services are compliant basically with federal regulations, appropriate acts, other laws, and things like that that come up. So I should have probably started with all of this, but in my head, the framing that I went through made sense. But to get into specifically what state monitor advocates do is they monitor the SWA's outreach, they advocate for improved services, and they report on services, right? So that's their three basic main functions. They're always looking to see, is what we're doing compliant? Is there a way we can be improving it? And also they report to the USDOL Department of Labor to make sure that they're reporting accurately the work that the SWA is doing, where there is room for improvement, also the successes that they have. So a state monitor advocate is not an outreach worker. They do go to farms, but when they go to farms, they're supposed to be talking to employers and workers and partner organizations and things like that to say, how are we serving you? Can we do better? Or what is working well that we can implement in other areas? Conversely, we also have outreach staff, which, like I said, the state monitor advocate actually monitors the outreach staff too. And the outreach staff are the people who are actually out in the field on a more regular basis. They're supposed to be the majority of their time in the field. And they're actually going out to farm workers at their working, living, and gathering places, wherever those things may be. And their job is to explain the services that we have and say, this is the whole host of services. We can, at the American Job Center, like I did at the very beginning of this, say, we have training programs, we have employment services, we can give you labor market information and things like that, and supportive services. They also explain the complaint system, and they, offer to take complaints, help in resolving complaints when they do come up. And additionally, they provide information on other organizations serving MSFWs in the area, which is where some crossover with migrant education programs might come in. So they could be sharing information potentially about migrant ed. And they also provide a basic summary of farm worker rights to the farm worker, which is important, right? So they can have some meaningful conversations about, this is your basic rights. And, do you have any questions? How are things going? If you have housing on the site, what's your housing condition like? Is there any problem that I can assist you with to try to work out with an employer? They're a really, really important asset on the ground for farm workers. And then in our regulations, we say we urge the outreach workers have to urge farm workers to go to the one-stop center. But my favorite part of our regulations is that it says if the MSFW cannot or simply just doesn't want to come into the one-stop center, to the American Job Center, then we have to provide some services on site. We actually will go and we'll help them, register for services, find jobs, make referrals, and get supportive services, appointments, things like that, actually on site. So they're this really important bridge between the American Job Center and the field. And field meaning, sometimes they make contact at work sites, literally in the field, right? Sometimes they make contacts at housing. Sometimes they make contacts at other service providers, food banks, churches, grocery stores, wherever it might be. That MSFWs are likely to congregate. I do see a couple of questions. So I'm going to answer this second one first, which says, has outreach been temporarily suspended due to COVID? So outreach should not be suspended right now because of COVID. Technically speaking, it never should have been. So the requirements and the regulations say that state workforce agencies are required to conduct outreach. And we issued some guidance to the states, understanding that at the beginning of the pandemic, states had, closed some offices and, originally kind of like said, I don't know how we're going to provide services safely. And they were concerned about that, which we understood. But the requirement to outreach to MSFWs never went away. And we informed states of that. So all states should be conducting outreach. They might be doing it through some virtual ways, and that could work depending on what they're doing. So some states are making more contacts through like phone, virtual, text, social media, stuff like that, which could be fine. But also a lot of states are going back to and increasing their in-person outreach again now. We made special emphasis on this from ETA because we wanted to make sure that all the states and the outreach folk understand that, farm workers are also very much affected by the pandemic. And oftentimes, when they're in packing houses and things like that in close quarters, and could actually really use our outreach and information and connection to health providers and all that stuff that we can help out with. So it shouldn't be suspended right now. If you're having any difficulty or you have concerns about it, that's another area where you could reach out to us, reach out first to your state monitor advocate, but you could also reach out to us if you have any difficulty making that connection, and we can, get that conversation happening. All right. Another question. How is housing monitored? And if we can provide wraparound devices to those workers that go to the HACs, both domestic and foreign, could we get referrals to more efficiently find and serve them? So the first part of that question, how is housing monitored? If we're talking about, let's see, I'm going to go back here. When we're talking about the agriculture recruitment system, in some cases, those orders have to provide housing to farm workers. And in those cases, there's housing inspections that are required. And state workforce agency staff will go out and actually conduct a pre-occupancy housing inspection to make sure that the housing is compliant. Then secondarily, if a field check is conducted, the state workforce agency staff will check the housing and make sure that it's still compliant while workers are actually there. The other question, if we can provide wraparound devices to those.
I think it's supposed to be services instead of devices.
Sorry.
No, sorry.
I should have put that together. Yeah, so I think, and so are you asking then, like, could we get more, share more information maybe between the partners to be able to? I think
that's, like, I was wondering too, when you were talking about about the people applying for workers, are any of those listings like public? Is there a way that we would know like when employers are requesting? Because that would be really helpful information for us. Yeah, so state workforce agencies, oftentimes, I think I
I don't know if it's safe to say all states, but I think all states probably have websites that you can search jobs on. If it's a clearance order through the IDRC system that's been cleared for recruitment in other states, then technically speaking, the employer's information should not be visible. So for contact information, so you'd have to reach out to the state workforce agency and say, hey, I'm interested in this one. You know, can you confirm what employer it is? I'd like to apply to it. But you can also work with your state monitor advocate and say, like, you know, could we get a listing when things come up in this area or something like that? Like, I can't say that they're required to establish that kind of information sharing, but it's something that definitely could be done, and we'd encourage to happen if that's something you guys want to get.
Yeah, because everything you're saying as far as like your contacts with health, and you're already going to the places they live. I hope everybody's listening, because they're tracking in the same places we are. If we can find a way to partner.
Absolutely. But those are some relationships that you'd want to develop on a one-on-one, you know, individual, I think, connection level with your state monitor advocate, which leads very well into this next slide here. And like I said before, you know, the SMA has several different roles. They monitor the SWA, they advocate for improvements, which can work together with migrant education to say, hey, we need to be working more with migrant education, you know, if that's their opinion. They report, but they're also a liaison with other partner agencies. We actually have written into our regulations for the monitor advocate role information on how they have to liaise with other partners. And specifically, again, we talk about the National Farmworker Jobs Program because that's a grant that we fund, but there's also content, which is listed on this slide, about meeting with representatives of organizations to receive complaints, assist in referrals of alleged violations to enforcement agencies, receive input on improving coordination with employment service offices, or improving the coordination of services to MSFWs. All of that sounds a lot to me like working together with partner organizations and other organizations serving farm workers, including, you know, migrant education would fall into that category. The regs that we have also say to foster that collaboration, the SMAs may establish MOUs with other organizations serving farm workers as appropriate, right? So it's not a requirement necessarily that they make an MOU with all potential partners, but it's something that's possible and something that our regulations encourage. So if that's something that you are interested in, you know, I encourage you to reach out to the SMA and say, you know, we could be sharing information. I would like to get information about jobs that are available, because I do see people on a regular basis who might be interested in them. And we have a joint interest in promoting those jobs as well and connecting people. Also a joint interest in sharing information that you might be getting on, you know, conditions that aren't compliant necessarily, or other complaints or concerns that farm workers might have that we could assist with directly. I see another question that was related back to the agriculture recruitment system. In order for an employer to apply for H-2A workers, do they have to go through this program? The answer is yes. So employers who request H-2A workers are technically doing a specific application for H-2A workers to use that program, but that is conditioned on the fact that they're also recruiting for US workers through the agriculture recruitment system. So the step one, basically, of if an employer is going to ultimately request foreign workers is to make a local order with the state workforce agency that gets cleared to be recruited in other areas within the state, plus other states. So all of that has to be happening at the beginning of that process. And that's a really important part of the H-2A application process. Another question, are there resources from the monitor we can present to the growers or employers so we can retain good rapport with them? I would say probably yes, right? So ETA doesn't make like a specific listing or packet that all the states use, but states come up with their own resources. And that's another thing that people can work through with their state workforce agency to make those connections and say, hey, can I have, do you have flyers or information about the services you provide, and exchange that information to broaden what you're providing. And I should say also, you're talking about, rapport with employers. The state workforce agency staff, including outreach staff, oftentimes wear, like the state minor advocate, kind of several hats, right? They go out there to provide outreach and say, these are all the services we have to the workers, right? They're very much worker focused, but they also want to have a good rapport with the employer too. So they can share information with employers about business services, about that labor market information, about we can help you make a job order, about compliance system and stuff like that. So that is, something that we're used to kind of balancing in this world, I think. And, if we can work together as well, potentially to, share resources, share tips of the trade and whatnot, provide inroads to partners. I think that's all valuable. But again, like that would have to be a state level activity. All right, and I see a question about the iCert portal. And iCert, I haven't thought about iCert in quite a while. But iCert, I think, was related originally to the H-2A program, right? And we have the flag system, the Foreign Labor Agricultural Gateway flag system website that OFLC, which is the Office of Foreign Labor Certification, operates. So when employers, I should say, who wish to hire H-2A visa holders from other countries go through that process, they're now going to be filing their clearance order form through the flag system itself, through the flag website, and then that would generate sending it to the state workforce agency for review, not through the iCert portal anymore. And I think I got all the questions from there. So going into what regional monitor advocates and national monitor advocates do, your regional monitor advocate is at the ETA regional office. So ETA has a national office, which I'm part of. They also have 6 regional offices throughout the state, which have a gathering of different states that they provide technical assistance and support and monitor. But the actual direct services of the work that we do, which is funded through grants, is done by the state workforce agency itself, done by the state's outreach people, done by the state monitor advocate, done by the other people at the American Job Center and things like that. But it is relevant to know that there exists an ETA regional office. And what they do is, again, kind of similar to what a state monitor advocate does. They monitor the states. They provide technical assistance and support. They also act as an advocate and recommend changes in policy and things like that up within their regional office, also up to ETA and the national office. And then at the national level, there's one national monitor advocate, which is me. And I review the functioning of the whole system, provide recommendations on policy and things like that, monitor how we're doing, report, liaise, all of the same similar concepts, but at the national level. There's a lot of repetition if you've kind of picked that up in the structure that we have in the monitor advocate system, being that there's a state monitor advocate, a regional and a national. The reason for that is because this is actually a really reactionary system. The monitor advocate system was established back in 1970s when the United States Department of Labor was actually sued by farmworker organizations in a case called NAACP versus Brennan, which I'm sure a lot of you may already know, but if you haven't done any research on that case, it's really interesting. It was sued by organizations representing farm workers who said, we don't have access to these services. You're providing access to all of these other individuals, but farm workers don't have access. Plus, when we do try to get services, they're not being provided on an equitable basis. And sometimes the things that are happening at the states. And again, remember, this is the case back in 1970. They were alleged that there was discrimination happening within those job orders and clearance orders that were being taken, things that we never want to happen, right? So what happened in that case, though, is that the U.S. Department of Labor did an investigation. Turned out they agreed, right? And they entered into a settlement agreement where they established a monitoring system so that it would never happen again, right? So it established in the state level, you've got somebody who's on the ground monitoring, making sure that this is not happening and that things are compliant. Then you have at the regional office a monitor and the national office a monitor as well. It also established the fact that we had to do outreach, and so that we are actually making sure that we are that bridge between the local offices and the farm workers. Also established that complaint system, and also established the agriculture recruitment system, and all the safeguards that I had spoken about earlier. So the point of this kind of speech is to say, this is a reactionary system. We know that, farm workers can be taken advantage of. And so now there's significant regulations in place within the Department of Labor, again, since the 70s now, that establish procedures and safeguards to make sure that we're, being strong advocates in making sure that things are compliant and equitable for farm workers. Like I said, part of that was what we call our employment service and employment related law complaint system. You don't have to say the whole title. If you're ever asking about it within a state, if you just say complaint system, they'll probably know what you are talking about. And if they don't, you should talk to me. But basically what it covers is, like I said, I think at the beginning, complaints about our services, right? So you come into a career center, you have a bad experience, you say, I don't think I was treated equitably, you can complain about that, right? So if a farm worker, example, came into an office and they were told, we can't help you because you speak Spanish and we don't speak Spanish, not acceptable. That's something that a farm worker could definitely make a complaint about, and we would take that very seriously to resolve and refer, if needed, to the appropriate places. Additionally, there are complaints that are about employment-related laws. So those are laws that are enforced by USDOL, Wage and Hour Division, OSHA, or other state, federal, local agencies. So it's really broad. So it could be about a job that we referred somebody to. That would be the first category here for ES or employment service related complaints. Or it could be about a job that we had nothing to do with, right? It could be about Walmart. We had no clearance order or job order with Walmart, and somebody comes in and says, I wasn't referred to you there. I've been working there for the last 5 years. I have a pay issue and I want to make a complaint about it. And that's something that we would take and be able to assist with. In some cases, it's relevant to know that we try to attempt informal resolution, which is still a formal process. We call it informal because we're doing it ourselves. So for example, if it's a complaint from a migrant seasonal farm worker, we're going to attempt to informally resolve it, right? Benefits of that is that sometimes that things are resolved quicker because we have our people out in the field. We can say, hey, fix it with us, we're compliant. Don't fix it with us, we refer it to Wage and Hour, and then you're going to be hit with fines and whatnot, right? But through an informal resolution process, we can get restitution for workers. We can resolve, certain conditions that are within our staff's ability. If it's outside of our staff's ability, we're going to refer it to enforcement, and enforcement's going to take care of it. And if it's a complaint about our services, then we can attempt informal resolution as well. But if it's not related to our services, not related to an MSFW, we're likely to refer it out to enforcement for them to fix it. Additionally, complaints involving discrimination, we're going to take those complaints, undocument them, but we are going to refer them out immediately because that's a specialized area too, which has some special timelines for processing and whatnot with the EOC and any other agency that might be involved. So other things to know on this slide, which are important for you all specifically, is who can file a complaint. A complaint can be filed by an individual, by an employer, by organizations, associations, or other entities, is what we say in our regs. So that means that if somebody from the migrant education program has a complaint, and it can be on behalf of an MSFW or not, right? You can say, I've been working with this individual through the program, through the work that I do. They've shared this information. I want to make a complaint on their behalf. You could do that. Or you could share that information with a outreach worker or the local office or a state monitor advocate. There's a lot of different places you can make these complaints to, and they can take that information, take action on it as well. So what I just described is actually what we call an apparent violation. So in addition to the actual complaint being filed, where somebody's saying, I want to go on record, I want to make this complaint, right? I want to be informed of what's going to happen with it and see the resolution. That's a complaint. There's a whole complaint form for it. But additionally, people can approach us. Sometimes we get information from other avenues. One time I was reading a newspaper and I saw information, unfortunately, about deaths on a farm. And I said, workers weren't supposed to be on that farm. There was a clearance order involved, right? It appeared to violate an employment-related law or regulation. So when we observe, have reason to believe, or otherwise are in receipt of information regarding a suspected violation of employment-related law or an employment service regulation by an employer, then that information is called an apparent violation, right? And basically, because it's being received by its state workforce agency staff, they have to do something with that information. They can't just say, oh, that's a shame, or oh, that's not good, or any of that, right? They have to say, that looks like an issue. We need to document it. We need to either, under some circumstances, again, attempt informal resolution, or otherwise we refer it out to the enforcement agency and track that. So benefit of having this kind of other category of what do we do with apparent issues is that sometimes workers aren't comfortable going on record and making a complaint, right? Oftentimes when we work with partner organizations, and this might be something that comes up for you, right? You might not want to go on record and make a complaint, through the migrant education program as the complainant or something like that, but you could share that information, and I hope that you will share that information if it happens, with an outreach worker, SMA, ES staff, whoever is under the umbrella of our state workforce agency staff that you're connecting with. And you can say, this is the information I've observed. I want to make sure you have it. They should then take that information, process it as an apparent violation, and make sure that it gets resolved. So it's a really powerful tool. And so I want to make sure that you guys know about that. Those are things that you can develop into if you do end up doing a MOU with a state workforce agency, or a state monitor advocate. You can work into, this is how we could share information, a process for that, and things along those lines. I see a question. So reports can be filed anonymously. If you are interested in filing a complaint in general, we do need to take the complainant's name. The complainant's name, and this is explicitly written into our regulations, will be kept confidential to the maximum extent possible. It's required that we keep it confidential, right? There are some times, however, where they're basically like the complainant's information might become apparent to an employer, right? And so, for example, you've got a small farm, right? 1 or 2 workers, and a complaint is made that someone's not getting paid right? The employer is probably going to figure out, that one of those 2 workers has made a complaint because we're involved, saying we're investigating a complaint. We will say we can't share the information. We will, we should audit the full payroll to be able to get to the bottom of what's going on. But at that point, the state workforce agency really should approach the person who's making the complaint and say, it's likely that your identity would be able to be deduced. Are you okay with that? But so the word anonymously is kind of misleading. If I were to say yes to that question, essentially is that it can't be filed anonymously, but your complainant information name would be kept confidential to the employer. However, you could report information in general anonymously, right? You can provide your information. And in that case, so if you report just information, you say, I don't want to file a complaint, but I want to give you this information, which would fall under the category of an apparent violation, then your information should still be kept confidential, regardless of whether it's a complaint or an apparent violation. But if you don't give your name and you say, I want to be kept 100% anonymous, that could work too, because we still technically have the information that appears to violate an employment related law or ES regulation. So we would still be required to do something about it to try to fix it or refer it. And I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, you can feel free to send a follow-up. So apparent violations complaints are great tools. I hope you will reach out. If for nothing else, I'm going to go back to that slide. If for nothing else, to just make sure that you have the contacts of where you would send things. That's one of the places that I had some interaction with migrant education programs in the past. I didn't share this about myself, but I started out as an outreach worker for the State Workforce Agency in New York in the past. And then after that became a state minor advocate, then a regional minor advocate, and now the national minor advocate. But when I was an outreach worker, some of the biggest crossover I would have was actually in this advocacy and complaint area with the migrant education folks up there. Is that, we had people from migrant ed who were on the front lines with migrant seasonal farm workers. Often were very likely to see compliance issues and wanted to fix it, right? So they would share that information with me. I'd be able to follow up with the employer. In a lot of cases, we can resolve things informally, which is great, right? Wage issues, housing issues, stuff like that are often easier to kind of fix ourselves at the State Workforce Agency level. So that's one way, you can definitely meaningfully improve farm workers' lives, I think, by sharing that information with the right people at the state. All right, and then I just have a couple more points here about what we do in the minor advocate system. We have our own definitions of farm work, and it is on the slide. I'm not going to bore you by going through all of it, but farm work is basically all the things you would typically think, right? The keys for us is that it hasn't been to market yet, and it hasn't been to storage yet. So all the farm work all the work, I should say, that's done by a farmer or on a farm, that's either directly, the working with the crops or the commodity, or like some simple processing to get it to stay long enough to get to market, right? So freezing, canning and stuff like that, as long as it's your still the agricultural product. So for example, if you're freezing grapes so that they last longer, then we still consider that farm work if you grew those grapes on your property. But if you're picking the grapes and then you turn it into wine, the wine is no longer farm work, right? You've processed it too much. And so there's a line there. But also the things like, the mechanics who are working on the farm that's producing farm work, and additionally the like transportation delivery drivers and stuff like that to get it to market are also considered farm workers for us. So I still encourage you, please don't not share information if you have concerns or collaboration, things that you want to work together with our staff, because you're not sure if it's the same definition of farm work. We tell our staff that other programs have different definitions of farm work, definitions of migrant and things like that. And we want to make sure that, if it seems like it's connected, let's start talking. You tell me if it doesn't work for your program, but I'm gonna be on the side of oversharing when it works to help people. Our definitions of migrant and seasonal farm worker, or MSFW, include somebody who's a migrant farm worker or a seasonal farm worker. So you don't have to be migrant to be considered an MSFW. It could be, you're working next door to where you live and you're conducting farm work on a temporary or seasonal basis. Seasonal farm worker and migrant are up here as well. Really, there is no minimum amount of time that you have to work in farm work. It could be one day. and it's temporary or seasonal, within the last year is what we would consider an MSFW. Migrant has all the seasonal markers, just plus can't go home within the same day. But our services, I should say, that I started with talking about what's available at the American Job Center, including the Wagner-Pizer program, which does the labor exchange. They're considered, I should say, Wagner-Pizer and labor exchange is considered a universal access program. You're not meeting eligibility criteria to get access to job search assistance, referrals to jobs, and specifically equitable services within all that for MSFWs, right? So if someone's not actually an MSFW, they should still be getting equitable services, right? But we do have a special monitoring program, which is the Monitor Advocate System, to make sure that's happening. But they should not be turned away from getting, access to job information and stuff like that. So basically what we have set up is a host of services for everybody. And then within that, a monitoring system to make sure that MSFWs receive full access to those services, but it's not an eligibility criteria per se. And I think that, no, it's not it. I have just some resources for you. Jessica should have these slides to be able to provide these links to you as well. Yep, and she just put them in the chat, which is great. So there's a directory that we maintain and we update regularly with all the state monitor advocates information and contact information specifically. So you can go through there and find out who is your contact for your state. How do I contact them for the phone or email or in person? And additionally, we have a Monitor Advocate System website that we maintain through Department of Labor. And there's a bunch of information on there if you're interested in some further reading on the work that we do and services and whatnot. The AJC directory, the American Job Center directory. And I see that link. Looks like it's not working. Let me see if it's working on mine. Well, let me open it, or maybe it will in a minute. But additionally, there's a toll-free website. It is working on mine. So if you go, that link should take you here, which you can search by city, state, or zip code. So if I do, I don't even know if it's zip code to try without giving away my exact location. But if you do that, I'll do this. Let's check Hawaii, and it should show all the American Job Centers that are in Hawaii.
The one I'm seeing that's not working is the one that says the Monitor Advocate System page, I think. Let me see. The State Monitor Advocate. When you open it, it just says there's nothing to be found. This one, the National Directory. Yours is showing up.
Yeah, this is, let's see. You're right. All right, so I'll provide an updated link, and I do have that here. Let's see. Well, you can also find it through one of the other links that I provided. If you go to contact and at the bottom here. So it looks like this. You have my contact information here, and then for all the regional offices up top, and then the state specifically underneath of it. So I'll copy this and drop this in there.
So we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. Lots of really good information there. I think to summarize it, we would suggest they reach out to their state monitor advocate and then see where they can go from there. Maybe they can do an MOU. Also, I feel like you guys have a lot of other really strong connections, like with National Farmworker Jobs. You guys have health programs you work with. You have, a lot of, like the enforcement agencies. It would really behoove all of us to reach out and then look at your own state situation and see who your people are. The good thing is we just talked last week about Migrant Ed to the state monitors. And so this is something that's on their radar right now. So maybe if you wait a couple months or something, they've had a lot of other things to do, but the timing might be really good right now before the holidays to just say, hey, I know holidays are coming up, maybe we can talk in January, but just to get that process started. Because I feel like according to the poll, it looks like the majority of us are not working with the monitor advocates. And so it doesn't make sense for us to be crisscrossing and not at least be aware and see if there's a way that we can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jessica, I have to apologize for, you probably told me to talk a lot less, but
No, you're good.
that's
You're good. They hear from me
have.
all the time. I thought it was great. So then I think we have another question. What's the question?
Yeah, I see a question about do job centers have, I think you're asking if like their data management system has a way of identifying MSFWs in generals, and that you've been told that your local one did not. It doesn't make sense. So they should be doing that. So if you can share that information about, you don't have to share it, publicly in the chat, but if you want to share it through Jessica, or you can send an email to the NMA at DOL.gov and share what state that is, we can reach out and make sure that they're, coding things properly. Because it is really important that we can identify people within our data management system who are MSFWs, so that we can then check things like I said, we monitor, right? And I didn't really go into exactly what that means, but that part of what that means is that we do, our SMAs monitor the states and say, let me look at the participant files. Do the participant files have evidence that they're getting the full range of services and stuff like that? And we can't do that if they're not coded properly. So another thing to remember is we approach work at ETA in my office specifically, from a compliance standpoint. We're not looking to get people in trouble when you share information like that, but it's useful for us because it's just going to help the farm workers. And ultimately, we're always thinking from the worker perspective. So please do share that information and we'll follow up with you.
Very cool. So those of you that are doing work with your monitor advocates, continue that on. Those that are not, we are recording this. We will put it on the webinar page that we always have on IDRC, plus on our YouTube channel. That way people can access it. Do have a request. I put 2 links. Let me go ahead and stop recording here. Sorry. Let me stop that.